All right, our next guest is Dr. Todd Frank Miller. He's written the book, The Final Pattern, The Critical Need for Critical Thinking. He's a snappy dresser and a snazzy dancer. Dr. Todd, thank you so much for coming at Left of the Valley.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, you say that now, you might regret in 5 minutes.
Hit me. I'm ready for this.
I got the large applause going this time.
I'm so proud of you.
He's already regretting it. Just be honest.
Dr. Todd, for our listeners that might not have been following your adventures, maybe you'd be so kind to give us a quick bio as to who Dr. Todd is. You don't mind me calling you Dr. Todd, right? I think it's such.
I'm good. That'll work.
It's like a cool.
Yeah. Well, like everybody who's ever been born, I was born an atheist. But I was singularly fortunate in that my father never indoctrinated me in any particular religious system. And so for the first 20 or so years of my life, I didn't think much about it. I mean, it was kind of a non-issue. Even my believing friends didn't make it an issue. So I just never thought about the non-belief. In fact, in some ways, I was a little smug about being an atheist. I thought, hey, wow, if I don't believe in any gods or any religions, I guess that makes me smarter than everybody, and I must automatically be a critical thinker. And I discovered to my chagrin that does not mean that. You can be an atheist and believe in a flat earth or leprechauns or the Illuminati. Atheism is a single point on a single issue. Do you believe in any gods? And at the current time, you say no. So one day I was on the internet and I came across a meme that said, a list of hidden persuaders. And at first I thought that was probably referring to subliminal advertising. And I've always loved hearing about subliminal advertising and how it's supposed to, move us like cattle and such. But I went ahead and clicked on it, and it turned out not to be anything about subliminal advertising. It took me to the Skeptic's Dictionary, a subset of it called A List of Hidden Persuaders, that listed a short list of cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And I started reading them, and after I got through about 5 or 6 of them, some of them I had heard of: confirmation bias, like you had mentioned before, cognitive dissonance, the file drawer effect, backfire effect. Some of these I'd heard of, but after I'd gotten to about a half a dozen of them, I started getting a very sick feeling to my stomach because I realized that I did this stuff too. Here I was, supposedly intelligent, educated, and I was no better thinker than anybody else. Even those people that I had denigrated and been smug about, I realized that I've got the same human brain wired the same way everybody else does. And that's what started this book, is that no matter where you are in life, no matter what your positions are in politics, in religion, or in any contentious subject, we all want to believe that whatever we do believe is already correct. And it's up to us to correct everybody else. But unfortunately, the human brain is wired by evolution to make us pattern-seeking machines, and we'll come up with something that makes us feel comfortable. We'll feel like we have an answer, and then our brain will spend 24/7 trying to bolster that with every cognitive bias that there is, with every logical fallacy that there is, just so that you can maintain your comfortable position. And so I realized that if such a smart, educated guy like me could fall prey to this, probably everybody in the history of the world is probably, a victim of this as well. And so now that I've got kids and, I'm worried about the world that they're going to inherit, I said, I've got to do something. So I went ahead and did the research and wrote the book. It's in its 2nd edition, but very soon will be an expanded 3rd edition because I'm going to be getting some additional input from some outside sources. I've got Dr. Shaheen Lacan, who is an MD, PhD in both neurology and psychology, and does many investigative reports. A colleague of his named Emanuela Affidani, who's a PhD in psychology and epidemiology, and also Nikola Vukovic, who's a PhD in both machine learning and artificial intelligence, trying to get their takes on my hypothesis here that the human brain is wired to make bad choices, bad decisions, and have bad opinions. Because right now it's basically a book about my own ideas and opinions, which has been well received. But of course, the person who wants to take issue with it is going to say, well, who's to say that this Dr. Miller person, knows what he's talking about? I mean, I'm an eye doctor, so I know eyes, but I was also trained as a scientist, so I understand how the scientific methods are utilized in all areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a huge proponent of that as far as being the best way of investigating reality that we currently have. So that's a short synopsis of kind of where I came from and where I'm at. I'm happy to go into any detail, but I don't know if that's enough at this point.
Absolutely. And I got to say, the book, I've been reading the book, and I really love how you start with the alien probe, because I think that's a point of view that a lot of people don't think about, and how you define scientific theory right off the bat. And it's very comprehensive, and there's a lot of focus on a pattern seeking from the species. But I'm really interested in what you just said there for a second, because you just said, your hypothesis is that we are wired to make bad decisions. Can you elaborate on that? Because that's counterintuitive.
Well, perhaps bad decisions was a poor choice of words, but we're wired to make knee-jerk decisions.
Agreed.
I use the term heuristics in the book quite often, talking about knee-jerk, rule of thumb, shorthand thinking. I think I heard earlier one of you discussing going through the same stoplight over and over again. And for the last 20 years, I've commuted the same way to my office. And, you can turn your brain off. It's so used to using shorthand that you don't even have to think about what you're doing, except to stay between the two dotted white lines and not go through the two red lights in front of you. And you can basically operate a very dangerous piece of machinery in order to get from one place to another. So when we do things repetitively, we tend to go with what's worked in the past. And if it works and we're successful and maybe even we make money at it and we get some kind of benefit from it, our brains, I think, get a little shot of endorphin saying, hey, you were just successful again. And you did it by using shortcuts. You didn't have to think deeply at all. You just used some rules of thumb that have worked for you in the past. And I'll bet if you continue to use those shorthand and rules of thumb on other issues, you'll be just as successful. And I think that's how people get these crazy ideas in religion and politics. They say, hey, I crossed myself, like this before I undertook this task, and it was successful. So now I realize that every time I do this, now I'm going to be successful at any task I put myself to, and my brain is going to be reinforced to do that. So, you can use a dartboard to make a decision. And if the first time you hit the target, it gives you the right answer, you're going to say, okay, all I have to do for the future is keep on throwing at a dartboard and it's going to tell me what to do. That's our brain in a nutshell. It likes to find shortcuts. It likes to find patterns, even if the patterns aren't there. Because the one thing that a human brain hates to do is admit, I don't know. That admission of ignorance is just painful for anybody. They tend to say, if I say I don't know in a group like this, no one's going to listen to me. I mean, if they're proclaiming ignorance, well, you don't have anything to add to the discussion. On the other hand, I could add a lot to the discussion. It could be a bunch of pablum. It could be some very entertaining pablum. As we know, when we watch the talking head shows on whether it's Fox, CNBC, whatever channel you want, they're not always talking about deep thinking. They're just doing stuff that's entertaining. And of course, if they have a guest on who's saying provocative things or seems to be spouting craziness, it doesn't make any difference if that guest is right or wrong. It's entertaining. Yeah. It's bringing in the viewers. It's getting the sponsors to give money to that show because it's getting lots of likes.
Hence Fox News.
Yeah, well,
all of them, honestly.
But I mean, it's not like, right, bad, left, good, or anything like that. That's simplistic. That's kindergarten stuff. They both had their points, and they still do at this point. But the fact is, when people truly want to find truth, that's where my book kind of comes in. If you truly want the truth, rather than just continuing to believe what you already believe, then you're going to critique your own thinking. That's basically my definition of critical thinking in my book, is not just thinking long and hard about something, but critiquing just your own epistemology about how you come to your own conclusions. And the thing is, it's not a very pleasant process. Lord knows when I look at my own epistemology on many cases, I say, I'm just going with what feels good. I'm just going with what I've believed for 30 or 40 years. I've never actually done the research on this. And so it's very sobering, because just when you think you've got the world figured out and you're right and everybody else is wrong, if you do critical thinking, you realize, not so fast.
Mm-hmm. You know, there was something that really struck me early on in your book when you were talking about the stage of truth seeking. And basically, it's almost like the atheist scale, you know, from 1 to 6 or 1 to 7 there. And 1 starts with I'm always right, and it goes all the way to I want to see where I'm wrong. Where do you think most of us, I'm not necessarily talking about atheists here, but here as a species, where do you think, in your mind, we are on that scale?
The scale of what now? Which scale?
The truth-seeking scale you were talking about? The stage of truth-seeking?
Oh, so that I write my book?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, no, it's
you did read the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. I read the book when I need to get to sleep. So, no, I think the vast majority of people simply, we're mentally lazy. Mm-hmm. We want to believe that we've already come up with the truth. We would hate to, again, admit to ourselves, I'm really not sure about this, and I don't want other people to be leading me by the nose in the wrong direction. So we tend to take one position or the other. And we tend to say, okay, now that I've got a position, I'm going to stay in this position until somebody can prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's shifting the burden of proof. If you've got a conclusion, it's up to you to supply the proof for why you think you're right. It's not for everybody else to prove you wrong. We got other things to do. Mm-hmm. I'm 58. I don't know how many years I've got left. I don't have time to disprove the Illuminati or Bigfoot or all these things. It's much easier just to ask the person, okay, you've made a claim. Now, please support it. Mm-hmm. And of course, they rarely can. They just say, no, I believe what I believe because I believe that I believe. And they're comfortable with that. And they say, I've got a whole group of friends that, support me. It's a congregation. We get together, we sing. Or if it's a non-believer group, the non-believers are saying like, hey, we all non-believe together. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to challenge each other. I've been members of several non-believing groups and I've run into Wiccans and flat earthers and people that believe in crystal therapy. Just because they're free thinkers or atheists or non-theists doesn't mean that they're critical thinkers. Critical thinking takes extra mental energy. And again, it's not necessarily a pleasant process when you discover how weak your own positions are. Mm. So that's a long-winded way to answer your question. I think most people are on the side of the scale that says, I'm happy with what I already believe, and I don't particularly care for somebody to challenge me.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You also claim in your book, you're saying that humans believe what will make them happy. Now, devil's advocate for half a second there. How is that dangerous? How is that a bad thing?
Well, yeah. I mean, how many people want to believe that global warming is going to end things faster than the world otherwise would be ended? Mm-hmm. Very, very negative, very bad, very depressing. In many cases, a hopeless feeling. And so who would want to believe that? So the people say, well, I don't want to believe that way. I'd rather be happy. Either, scientists are going to figure out a way around this, or the science that they've already come up with isn't accurate enough, and they've jumped the gun back in the 70s on this stuff. Or they'll say, God is going to protect us because God is all powerful. The problem is when you use that thinking in one area, you're also very likely to use that kind of thinking in other areas. And if you get it wrong about one thing, you're likely to get it wrong in others, despite how good you feel. People tend to go with what feels good. And, everyone wants a shot of dopamine or endorphin or serotonin in their brain that makes them feel good. And if they keep coming across thoughts that are negative or depressing or give a feeling of hopelessness, it's going to be very hard to bolster that feeling. But that's the hard thinking that needs to be done. That's why critical thinking isn't particularly pleasant. It's not particularly difficult. It's just that it's hard to get in a frame of mind where you want to be proven wrong if you are wrong. If you can be proven wrong, then you realize, well, thank goodness I know that. Now my worldview's a little bit more accurate. And now I need to start looking at other aspects of my thinking that might also be damaging. That you might be familiar with the website, What's the Harm? Which is kind of a rewording of your question. And it's entirely devoted to people that said, why don't you just let us believe what we want to believe? And he says, well, let me show you. These people who believe this led to a catastrophe monetarily in this country, or, the science went bad or whatever. So it's, to me, it's very important to seek out actual truth and actual reality, despite how it makes you feel, whether it makes you happy, sad, depressed, whatever. The truth is the truth. It doesn't particularly care what the human feels.
Mm-hmm. Years ago, I was debating with a philosophy professor, and I was telling him my hypothesis, as uninformed as it is, was basically that, being correct is probably one of the most satisfactory feelings we have as a person. Ergo, being incorrect is essentially the reverse. Nobody likes to be incorrect, and I think a lot of people put up their shields and will double down because they don't want to experience that feeling. Do you feel that's what you're seeing as well in your book here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everybody is defensive. Nobody wants to look bad. Everybody wants to save face. And yes, you get a positive reaction out of being right. But in the book, I mentioned that I think the way our society acts right now is that they do denigrate people that either are wrong or admit to ignorance. And to me, it should be exactly the opposite. The people that admit ignorance, say, I don't know enough about this subject to make a conclusion, they should be lauded. They should be applauded for that openness and that honesty. Because what we've got right now is we've got, on most areas, either 2 or 3 areas of contention where people are constantly bopping heads, and nobody's going to admit being wrong on either side. They wouldn't dare want to lose face in front of the peanut gallery, whether it's a Facebook thread or some other blog or something like that. They don't want to admit that they could be wrong or that they made a poor point. I don't know about you people, but when I've had many online debates, I will specifically list the logical fallacies and the cognitive biases that my quote-unquote opponent is using, and they still won't admit to it. It turns into, I'm a bully. It says, you're just mean and you don't like to respect other people's opinions and you're just not open-minded enough to my ideas. And I say, well, I try to be open-minded, but letting logical fallacies and cognitive biases slip by, it's not going to be a productive discussion. You've got to wipe those things away to have something productive. And this is why the scientific method is so successful, is because it starts by realizing the scientists and investigators involved are biased. That's why we have to do double-blind studies. So that both the investigator who's biased doesn't know what's going to happen and the person being treated doesn't know what's happened, so that bias can't influence the results. And every time that is used properly, then you may not get an actual truth, but you'll get closer to it and you won't go down a rabbit hole or find a red herring and waste a bunch of time, like on these Ig Nobel prizes. There are some things that sound silly, like the Ig Nobel prizes are actually, if you made a joke saying like, hey, these guys have been studying fruit flies for 80 years. Don't we know enough about fruit flies? And of course, it sounds silly on the surface, but of course they're finding, no, we've discovered genetics from all this. Yeah. And we've been able to make amazing, advances in it by using this model. Now, transporting a hippopotamus or rhinoceros upside down, I don't know how practical that is on a daily basis. That probably deserves an Ig Nobel Prize.
Well, that one, so actually that one, though, was an endangered
I was just
rhino,
gonna
and so
say
they're
that-
using it for conservation efforts. So it
Yeah.
actually is helpful overall.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because on the surface, that's what you see.
Right,
It does. It sounds really silly, but I think that at the end of the day, they're actually probably really
They're doing
practical
good with it.
to a lot of the studies, and that's why I'd be fascinated. I'd be one of those people going,
Yeah.
"Let's look at that. Why not? What's on that chewing
Well,
gum?"
what's with the upside down thing? Why upside down?
Yeah,
It just travels better that way.
I
Yeah,
think
maybe
it's
it's-
silly. It's all silly. You guys are just, you know.
But back to that point you made about pointing out to people their arguments and their fallacies. I've done this online, and I always get the, like, basically my elitist attitude argument. Like, how dare you be educated? How
Yeah, I
dare you
get
know
that.
what you're talking about? Like, you're just being a snooty bastard.
That's what they're saying about you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, an ad hominem. Yeah, it's like I can't refute your actual reasoning and your actual epistemology. So I've got to go with something that's going to save my face or something that's going to be entertaining for the peanut gallery. And so I'm going to start the snarkiness.
Yep.
You know, this is how most debates go on, whether they're online or in person in an auditorium. Is that very rarely does any actual progress get to be made because they're too busy insulting each other or trying to decrease the person's credentials, saying like, well, you're just not you're not suited to this particular argument because you're not a theologian, you're a scientist, so what could you possibly be talking about theology if you're a scientist? And again, it gets bogged down where very little productive dialogue goes on. And that's why the way I wrote my book was to be very general. It's not just about theology. It's not just about science. It's not just about anything. I mean, I list hundreds of, in the section, a collection of irrational nonsense, hundreds of different things that Western society has come up with. It doesn't even include most of the Eastern philosophies and the ridiculous stuff that they've come up with, or the Africans or the New Guineas or all that stuff. The book would be too thick. So I wanted to write a book that could approach any subject, literally any subject out there, and simply say, okay, you've made a claim or you have a position. Can you show your homework? Can you show how you came to it? Are you simply going with what makes you feel good, what makes you happy, what has worked in the past? Or can you actually show the work that other people can check as well, which again is why the scientific method works. You can go to any country, any language used, any culture, and science is science. And a Chinese scientist can disprove an American scientist. And usually, I mean, of course, even scientists are human. They don't like being proven wrong, particularly if they've spent years or decades on it. But if they're a true scientist, if they truly want the truth, they'll eventually thank that person, says, thank you for stopping me where I was wrong so I don't waste more time on this. Now I'm a little bit more accurate, and maybe we can get even more productive. So if that kind of approach could be applied to any contentious subject, then, again, a lot more productivity could be created, I believe.
It's interesting you point that out because I from my personal experience, and it's only my opinion, it's only worth that much. It seems to me progress happens on a generational scale because it seems like when you get into a mindset, people are so stuck there that even if we were talking about this with modern monetary theory last week, you approach with a new theory about economics, and the old guard will not accept it. It's only once they die that a new generation comes in that change actually happens. Do you feel that's exactly is there a way to overthrow that for the rest of us to be more open to critical thinking?
Yeah, I mean it's a very good point. With who they call the millennials, the ones who I guess are in their 20s now, and they've been raised in an era of the internet. The internet is probably the death of both religion, but also a lot of irrational thinking because people have instant access to information and other ideas that their parents have probably tried to protect them from. If you somebody said that they went to religious schools, whether they're Jewish or Muslim or Christian schools, their parents want to keep them in a bubble. But once the internet's out there, their parents can't keep them in a bubble any longer, and they start talking to other people, and they start having these debates and these things, and they start saying, "Holy cow, I've never heard of this stuff before." So yeah, the internet with the millennials coming through, the old guard will have to die off. But eventually what's going to happen is not only is religiosity decreasing, by leaps and bounds, but also the other areas of irrational nonsense, the flat earthers, the conspiracy theories, all these kind of things will evaporate once people start doing more critical thinking. Now, the big thing is, people have said, well, you can't teach critical thinking in school. It just isn't possible. And I say bullshit. I think most of the time, the people in power, the old guard, who say, hey, you know what, when we have these believers and we keep everything just as is, we keep getting our people elected and we keep, our corporations going, and this is good for the economy. So why would we want the population to start questioning things and asking how things are done, and could they be done in a different way? So, I started with critical thinking just by coming across a list of cognitive biases and logical fallacies. If you learn, a dozen of those in an afternoon, you can already attend any debate and point out to the people talking what logical fallacies they're using at the time. Straw man, ad hominem, cognitive dissonance, or confirmation bias. And you start being able to peel back all the nonsense that most politicians and most people in power use to stay in power. So it's going to be very interesting to see the old guard die away and the new guard, the millennials and everybody who follows them, take over the mantle. If it's possible for them to learn these critical thinking skills, the progress made is going to be amazing. In my upcoming third edition, the conclusion has been expanded, and it's called The Legacy of Sputnik. Because when Sputnik went over, it was in 1957, and in 12 years, America had a man on the moon. 12 years. All it took was making math and science a priority, teaching it in schools. And we went from gasoline cars, the 57 Chevy, to landing on the moon on the first try in 12 years.
Right.
That's when you introduce the math and the science into schools, and within a dozen years, you get that kind of success. If you introduce critical thinking, whether in the schools or just through the internet or my book or 10,000 other different ways, that legacy of Sputnik is going to expand in 10,000 directions, because all the irrational nonsense will eventually melt away, and whatever is left may not be the truth. It'll just be much closer to it and actually lead to a productive dialogue.
Yeah, but the motivation for Sputnik was not a scientific one or one of discovery. It was essentially just a political one. It was beating the Russians there.
Agreed.
So
It
maybe
was saber rattling.
Means
yeah, it was
justified.
saber rattling. It's a shame. It's kind of a shame that we need something like that to spawn on, which would be us at our best. And it kind of sucks because we talk a lot about politics here on the show, and it kind of sucks to think that even today, if President Biden was to show up on a meeting and basically say about any topic, say, I don't know. Oh my God, he's almost killed his career or his presidency just by doing something like that.
Kevin,
Exactly.
you only think that way because of the fake news narrative that has been propagated to you by the left, and that's the only reason you think that stuff, man. Just saying.
Yeah, of course, I'm sure everyone realizes here that, as long as you say something with conviction and with, confidence, then somebody will actually listen to you. I mean, I don't have to tell you about a relatively recent president who just kept on saying, believe me.
Yeah.
He would say some kind of pablum and just say, believe me. And he'd just go on to the next thing. He was just filling airtime, and it didn't make any difference how crazy it was. I mean, it was still enough for the public to say, this guy tells it like it is. I just love the fact that he always talks like this, and he's got his hands here, and he really is so firm in everything that he does without even listening to what he's saying. So that's why I say our society really loves somebody who seems confident and strong. And I wish we would get to a point where they actually lauded someone who says, you know what, I don't know enough about that subject to give you an answer. Let me do some research and I'm going to get back to you on that. If they could laud that, then again, we'd have a chance of some real success.
It almost feels like the species, humans, are not smart enough to attain that threshold. I hope I'm wrong, but at the same time, we're talking about generational changes. Change happens in a generation. When we're facing things like climate change, can we afford to wait for a generation to die out for a new modern way of thinking to come in?
No.
I guess the question becomes, well, what do we do then to get to people to think more critically?
That's the $10,000 question. That's what this is trying to go toward here. Excuse me. I wish I had the magic answer as to how you do this, because it's a hard sell. I did not want to believe that I was a poor thinker. I would, there's a quote in the book by the comedian Emo Phillips, and it says,
Emo?
Yeah, Emo Phillips.
Okay.
You don't know Emo Phillips? You need to look him up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He talks like this. And, there's a quote by him that I don't know if he did in his act or whether he just wrote it for his memoirs, but it said, I used to think that my brain was the most wonderful organ in my body. Then I realized what was telling me this.
No, your brain's good. It's good.
Oh, that's so accurate.
Again, I mean, who's going to believe, and I talk about it in my book, who's going to believe that their brain is not trustworthy?
Exactly.
Right.
I think my brain is so faulty, I'm going to have to rely on somebody else to tell me the truth here. Man, they need to make my decisions for me because I'm not smart enough. No one's going to think that way. We're on our own. We're a brain encased in a meat sack, and this is all we've got to get through life. And we're going to say, I'm going to rely on mine. Now,
clearly you've never done acid. I'm just saying.
Not yet, but I'm open-minded and willing to try. But think of a normal distribution curve, right? And the average is right in the center. By definition, half the population is of below average intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
It goes to anything. Any population, half is below average. But everybody, you ask, how good a thinker you think you are? Oh, I think I'm above average.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks they're above average. No one wants to think that this is being fooled.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite pastimes is watching the shows on television, How the Magician Does It. They have the masked magician, and they show an amazing illusion. I actually trained in magic as a teenager, and I thought I knew what to look for, misdirection, all these kind of things. And there they have an amazing illusion, and I'm going like, crap, that's pretty good. That's pretty damn convincing. I don't got anything. Then they show how it's done. It's pathetically easy. It is so easy because magicians are experts at exploiting these shortcomings in our brain, the pattern seeking that we love to do. Okay, this follows this. Oh my God, they cut that person in half. Oh my God, that pattern doesn't make any sense to me. Right. And then they show you how it's done, and you realize, my brain is pathetically easy to fool over and over again, even when I know what to look for. And that's the realization. That's the depressing realization that as wonderful as evolution has come up with this brain, it can do amazing things. It can do computer science, rocket science, calculus. It can create music, art, love. It does amazing things, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. Because evolution does not end in perfect forms. All evolution leads to is good enough forms. Good enough to reproduce, good enough to keep the genetic line going. You don't have to be a genius to have sex and give birth to the next generation. You can be well below average and still reproduce.
I can hear banjos.
Florida's evidence of that. I'm just saying.
Texas, Americans have more than their share. I mean, we probably have I need to move to Canada.
Me too. Yeah,
You're all welcome here.
but it's depressing because, again, like we were talking about the space race before, incredibly impressive, and then since then, I mean, we've done other things like, find the Higgs boson and some other amazing things, the Hubble telescope, some really incredible things, dark matter. But as far as America kind of taking the lead in being smart and progress, we're kind of languishing.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
now because of the internet, other countries have been able to come up. And I think it's good. It's great to have competition. I mean, bring on the Chinese, bring on the South Koreans, bring on everybody. I think it's great. But it's just, it's depressing to see how in our day and age that America has kind of decided, you know what? We've been so good since World War II that everybody should just listen to us from now on about everything because we're so smart. And
But
the rest of the world is saying that it's just not that way anymore.
we weren't that great after World War II. It's because the whole rest of the world's infrastructure was bombed.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
We weren't that great. We were just the only one with stuff left.
That's true. That's true. And we divvied up the rest of the world, the Middle East and Europe. And so we just decided where everything was going to be according to what worked best for us.
Mhm.
It's almost like America's stopped dreaming. They stop dreaming about the future. They stop, getting ambitious about discovering things, which is what I think is when humans are at their best, when they're trying to explore the unknown possibilities. And now it seems ever since, I hate to come back to this, but ever since Reagan, the only thing that matters is get rich or die trying. It's like there's no more ambition for anything like that.
You mean like all the moneyed people were all just like, this is it right here. Like,
Yeah.
Let's just stay right here.
Yeah, it's hard to watch other people be successful. You watch the Bezoses and everyone in the world that make money by millionaires by 25, and they say they're living the life of Riley, and why would I work so hard in college for so many years, going about it one way when I could just do a startup of my own and become immediately successful. I've become very philosophical in my old age in that, when I finally die, I mean, what kind of legacy am I going to leave behind? I can only speak for myself. And, it says, well, okay, I had a career, I had a family, we did some traveling. It was really great. Some wonderful meals, all this kind of stuff. But have I really left anything to the next generation and anything to the planet as a whole? And I think the vast majority of people just say, if I live rich and die and everyone loved me, that would be the definition of success.
Yeah.
But there are people that just decide, I might not get any accolades, but I'm going to go into this scientific research to see how it might benefit mankind, or I might go into charity to see if I can help these people, so that their legacy is a little bit more than just monetary success. I don't really have an answer to your question about how America lost that dream of just, reaching for the stars or trying to do something amazing. It just seems like the most expedient thing is to get a career that gives you enough money to do what you want. And I don't have the magical way to get out of that.
It seems that humans are we're a social species, and let's face it, all that we have today is essentially us standing on the shoulders of our predecessors, right? We have a great collective memory, which allowed us to develop the technology. Do you think maybe that's part of the reason why people have a hard time thinking critically? We don't have to be smart to survive today. You don't have to use your intelligence. So is this maybe one of the reasons why we don't really develop it?
Yeah, it's a very good point. In fact, you might be familiar with Carl Sagan's paragraph on this. I think he wrote in The Demon Haunted World. He says he foresaw about his grandchildren's generation that the majority of the people in the world were not going to understand the technology. They could use it. They can use the technology of the smartphone, the computer, and whatnot, like you say, to be successful, to have a good life, but not have enough background information to know how it works, how to repair it, or how to get along without it.
It's like idiocracy.
Yeah, I mean, somebody was mentioning before about the freeze in Texas, where I think it was Benjamin, 4 days he was without power.
Yep.
Holy shit! You don't have your computer, you don't have your smartphone unless it was already charged or something. So how do you survive? And that's a very good point. I mean, I think in today's world, instead of just worrying about nuking another country, most countries are working on how to destroy their electronic infrastructure, some way that could short out everything and say, okay, you don't have your smartphone anymore, you don't have your computer anymore. Now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You can't, handle us. We're going to come and run right through your country.
If that doesn't
That's a
happen
good
naturally.
I mean, that's a good tool for war, isn't it? Like the EMPs or whatever, like in War of the Worlds, where you just knock out. I mean,
Absolutely.
You're completely defenseless.
Yeah, well, what do you do?
It's like,
So yeah, it's a good point because again, most primary and secondary education is the 3 R's and learning to the test. Very little real world application. Typically, once you get your high school diploma or your degree or something, you are re-educated by wherever you work, so you know how that work is done. But as far as really understanding the world, it's the people on Facebook that don't trust the scientists as far as COVID and the vaccines. They're likely the ones who, in science classes, their eyes were glazing over. They say, "This is stupid. When am I ever going to use this stuff?" And of course, this is a perfect example of when you would use that stuff. You understand why the people that were studying virology and epidemiology for 40 or 50 years, just for these occasions, knew what they were talking about, and you could rely on their expertise. Instead, the person is ignorant of the science. They didn't pay attention in science class, or they didn't do well. Now they say, "You know what? I think I'm going to go with what makes me feel good."
Yeah.
I've read this meme over here that says that this is just a left-wing plot to ensnare us, and they're going to inject us with, mini bots that are going to take over our brains, kind of thing. And this kind of goes back to what Kevin was asking before about, what's so bad about me believing in what I want to believe? Says this is a great example. It leads to 600,000 plus U.S. deaths.
Yeah.
I don't know how many millions worldwide. And it's still happening. And people are still not getting the vaccines for thinking this poor way.
Yeah.
So
I
went
they're
off on
always
a
like,
rant.
No, it was a heart attack though. It was what
Yeah.
They didn't die
and
from
they
COVID.
put it
They
down
died from the heart
COVID.
attack.
Yeah, and I'm just like, you don't think a COVID could cause a heart attack? Well, you don't get that like
Yeah, when you can't breathe, it's
Jesus.
hard for your heart to keep pumping, right?
Yeah. I
Right.
used but for COVID, I wouldn't have had that heart attack.
Yeah, and it's
Exactly.
like, and real quick, let me throw this out there. Like, and I think it was a really good point that in cognitive dissonance, Tom, he made a point. He said, like, if you have 2 people in a boat, and the boat is made for 2 people, if a third person climbs onto the boat, you can't blame any of the 2 previous people for sinking the boat, right?
No.
It's the third person that climbed upon it.
Yeah.
Like that is, and that's the sort of their point through that. But that's like such a thing I have to explain to so many fucking people. Like over and over, like I've made that point over and I can't even tell you in Florida. Are you kidding me? Like there's so many people that I've had to tell that to. Because they were like, yeah, but they had, they were like already had this thing, man, and that's what killed them. Like, but they got COVID. And they're like, yeah, but they had this other thing. I'm like, dude, like that's the thing that killed them. Like that wouldn't have killed them had it not been for the fucking COVID. Like, what is difficult about this? Jesus.
I think a lot of that is the people not wanting to see their own mortality.
I think a lot of it is people just don't want to listen to it. It's the same excuse when you have people that talk about climate change. Oh, it doesn't exist
Mortality,
because he
yeah.
doesn't want to lose his big Mustang with his V8.
Mhm.
He likes that thing, right?
Yeah.
It's
what keeps him comfortable.
Yeah, it's what keeps him happy. What's keeping him comfortable. He doesn't want to look at the prospect of maybe I should buy an electric vehicle.
Yeah,
and the same thing with COVID there.
And my explanation to them usually is like, hey, if you park your car in your garage and you leave it running, you fucking die. There's 1.4 million of those fucking things rolling over the goddamn planet at every moment. Like, and you don't think that has any impact on the fucking planet? Really? Like that? Really? Come on.
I have a feeling.
Christ.
I have a feeling a lot of people kind of think that their lifespan is so short that they won't have to worry about it. They just say, hey, I'm going to have a good time while I'm here. I don't know what my kids or my grandkids are going to inherit. But if the human lifespan were closer to like 200 or 300 years, it probably would become a higher priority. It's like, holy crap, I'm going to have to live here after this time as well.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people just realize, I'm going to die soon anyway. I'll leave the problem to them.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not even mentioned here. The religious people that'll think, oh no, God's going to save us from climate change. He said he would never flood the earth again. And so, not even go there. Dr. Todd, why do you think people are having such a hard time grasping logical fallacies?
Probably, you mean their own logical fallacies?
Yeah, or the concept of logical fallacies as a whole, I guess, or anything like that.
Well, I mean, if someone points out their own logical fallacy that they just used, they're just going to probably do a knee-jerk reaction of denial. So, no, I did not do that. This is not an example of that logical fallacy you just pointed out. One of the cognitive biases and logical fallacies is the file drawer effect. It's kind of the other side of confirmation bias. If you see something that confirms what you already want to believe, you're going to give that more weight. But if somebody brings up something that's against what you already believe in, you're going to file that away and not have to deal with it. You're going to kind of compartmentalize the negativity.
Mhm.
And so, most people are just going to deny that they could be capable of that. When you're face to face with somebody, whether it's by video or just doing it on Facebook, again, there's the peanut gallery everybody's worried about looking bad in front of. So they're not going to back down there. What I'm hoping is that when they read the logical fallacies on their own, in privacy, where they don't have to answer to anybody, then, like me, if they're honest with themselves, they don't have to worry about being honest with who they're dialoguing with. As long as they're honest with themselves, they should recognize themselves. They, just like when I looked at those fallacies the first time, it says, I do this too. And that's where I got the sick feeling in my stomach, and I was depressed about it for months. I said, I can't believe that my brain isn't superior to everybody else's. And I discovered it's just the same as everybody else's, or at least it's wired the same. And so I truly believe, and the reason why I wrote the book was I put the list of the fallacies and the biases in the book first for people to recognize themselves in, then to go into detail about many of them with the examples in the chapters, and then putting the quotes in there for other critical thinkers that have thought about this and realized that they themselves do this, that even Socrates said that the definition of education is realizing how ignorant you are, how little you know. If you can admit that to yourself, then you're going to be a little bit more open to not only new knowledge, but having your own thoughts challenged and in some ways overturned. And I think I also put the quote by Socrates in there saying, if you prove me right, I've learned nothing. But if you prove me wrong, I have learned something. That it's so simple. Those simple, eloquent quotes have so much depth to them that if we pay attention to them, I think we've got a chance.
So,
But then, sorry, Ben, go for it.
So here's my whole thing. So, let's just look at critical thinking from a very base. I have no idea. I personally believe that all humans are inherently lazy. So we're going to want an easy way. What do you think is the easy way where I am just a baby to critical thinking? What's my easy way to just jump in?
I've been thinking about that myself, because not everybody wants to read, a book like this. Again, Spielberg has not contacted me about the movie rights, and it's not an entertaining book. Again, it makes you feel bad about yourself in many ways. Not an easy sell. But to answer your question, I've been thinking about putting together a video channel showing these examples where you don't have to even do the mental effort of reading. You can simply watch a video where somebody uses an example of confirmation bias. In fact, there's many shows that already do this. I forget. I think one's called Brain Games. There's probably 500 on Netflix.
Great.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. They show how easy it is to fool people. So to answer your question, Ben, I think you have to spoon feed some of these people. They say, look, I'm going to click through 30 videos tonight before I go to bed. Why would I click on this one? And I've got to find some kind of a snare, a lure to get them to click on it in order to say, so you think that your reasoning is really good, huh? Try this on for size. And give them an example and show them how easy it is for them to be fooled. And again, in the privacy of their own home, with nobody looking over their shoulder, hopefully they would realize, okay, they just proved to me that my brain is kind of faulty sometimes. Here's a link to the book, or to maybe a critical thinking course, something like that, to where they could actually take the next step. But no matter how you slice it, it's a hard sell. People want to already believe that they're thinking well enough. If they've already been successful, they're going to assume I'm thinking well enough. I don't have to change anything about how I think.
It's a hard sell because it requires intellectual honesty, and intellectual honesty requires a intellectually honest goal as well. When the majority of people, their goal is just to get rich, they don't need to dwell into this. So this is not for me, obviously. And
exactly right. If you've already made it, I mean, why spend the extra time?
Yeah, if your goal is to get rich, why does it matter if you're right or wrong? I'm rich. It's all that really matters to them. So I guess, and we were talking earlier on about how generational leaps and bound in improvement. Is this where we need to go? Do we need to start teaching the younger generations about critical thinking?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think it'd be that difficult. I remember when I was in second grade, the teacher had us all sit on the ground in a circle. There were about 25 of us, and they did the game. I think it's called Post Office, where she whispered a one-paragraph story into the ear of the first child. They whispered it into the next child's ear, and it went all the way around the circle in about 5 or 10 minutes. So the teacher had the last person who got spoken to write the story up on the board, and then the teacher wrote the original story next to it. And they saw that within a span of 5 minutes or 10, the story was completely unrecognizable. Somehow, each person heard it a little bit differently, put their own inflection on it. They said, I don't like the word that they use. I'm going to substitute my own word. And they said 50. I don't like 50. I'm going to make it 100. And it just keeps on getting changed and changed within 5 or 10 minutes. And that's a wonderful example of how stories change, how memories change in very short order. And I still remember just from second grade, I mean, it still hits me today how the truth, that first paragraph, was totally changed by kids that probably had no agenda whatsoever, just their brains, the way their brains were fooled, the way their brains were sifting the information, how they were transposing the information. And, I don't know if this teacher was a critical thinker or a non-believer or something, but she realized that it was only going to take 10 minutes. Maybe it was raining outside for recess and let's just do something inside. But that's at a second grade level. And then you can go on in third and fourth and fifth grade to start introducing slightly more sophisticated examples. And of course, in junior high and high school, the sky's the limit. The kids already know how to learn, and they're going to start really questioning a lot of things and having wonderful discussions. So, rather than put a priority on, say, teaching, I don't want to denigrate any other subject, but I don't know, maybe a second language, instead of requiring a second language, having a course in critical thinking that had to be taught at least several different grade levels, just to at least introduce the idea. And then, of course, if the kids get interested, they can take it on themselves in years to come and go into even more depth.
Well, you'll be surprised to know that this is already starting to happen. Here in British Columbia, for example, it is part of the curriculum now to start teaching critical thinking to kids.
What grade?
I don't know. I think they're starting in the high school. I think. I don't know how deep the course is or how elaborate it is in there, but I do know it is actually part of the curriculum. So,
well, that's wonderful. But my point would be is why wait that long? I think there's the quote by I forget the name of the theologian. Give me the child up to the age of 7, and I'll show you the man.
Yes.
The mind has already been warped. It's already been twisted. And someone just says, look, you don't have to think deeply about this. Just have faith. Mm-hmm. Have faith in your own reasoning abilities. Have faith in this book. Have faith in what the clergy are telling you. And you don't have to think about this. If they wait till high school, I mean, that's better than what we've got. The U.S. doesn't have any of that. But if you wait till high school, then you have to deprogram the child. They said, I've already had, 7 or 8 years here of being indoctrinated, And this critical thinking course is tearing at my psyche, all my beliefs that are intertwined with my memories and my emotions is being ripped to shreds by this critical thinking. I don't want to do this critical thinking anymore. It's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. And now my parents are mad at me for thinking for myself. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's great that they at least have it in high school. But I mean, this, like as I mentioned, it could start as early as first or second grade with simple ideas just to show kids this is how easy it is to fool you and your friends and everyone who thinks they know the answers. We're all in this together. We have a chance. If we'll use these techniques and learn these fallacies and such, we've got a chance.
So using that, if, say, schools aren't teaching it, as a parent, what kind of things can a parent do with their kids to kind of teach these things?
Instead of praying at night, going through a chapter of the book.
There you go.
The book.
No,
Just
no,
read.
I've got the good book here.
I
All right,
keep-
Critical Thinking 101.
I keep seeing a Facebook ad for a deck of cards on critical thinking, and it lists logical
nice.
fallacies and biases. It's wonderful. I think it's a game, and it's probably a wonderfully entertaining game, because any game that lets you see a little part of your opponent's brain and their personality is always entertaining, because that's how we entertain each other. And so when you realize, haha, look how easily you were fooled, and then they come back and say, well, you were fooled too. Do you see that? And you laugh at it. And like you say, we're a social species. We enjoy laughing at ourselves. And that's the great irony, is on the one hand, people will say, okay, I was wrong. I admit that I was wrong. And they realize they're being a big person by admitting they're wrong. But then on this other subject, they say, there's no way I could be wrong about this. Whether it's their theology, their politics, they say, no, I've already done the thinking on this. There's no way I could be wrong. I was wrong here. I admitted that I was wrong here. But no, here, there's no way I could be wrong. My brain's just too infallible for that.
Well, I sure hope you don't get a look into my brain. Trust me, that's not a place you want to go.
It's all full of
Or
dad
mine.
jokes.
Yeah, let's say that.
That's
lot of
all it is.
That's
Yeah, a lot of stuff.
Cobwebs and stuff like that.
I vacuum there once a week.
Dr. Todd, thank you so much for being on the show. Really, really appreciate that. But if people want to find out more about your book and where they can get it, where can they contact you or get the
It
book?
is on Amazon. It's both in print form and on Kindle form. And again, what I'm hoping to do with the extra collaborators I have on the expanded edition, we're hoping to get it done by the end of the year. So you can get the second edition now. I wouldn't get the first edition. I think I've taken that off Amazon, but the second edition is much more smooth and well-rounded. But the third edition is going to also hopefully be illustrated, have an index, and have the contributions of these other three doctors Lacan, Alfedani, and Vukovic. I also forgot to mention that Anthony Magnabosco of Street Epistemology has written the foreword for it.
Oh,
And
nice.
he's been very kind in that regard.
Nice,
and I mean, he's a great hero to me, as are you guys for doing the work that you do. I
Oh,
appreciate
good.
you having me on your show, and I appreciate you encouraging this kind of thought and critical thinking.
Yeah.
Flattery will get you everything. We'll send you the check in the mail.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Dr. Todd, thank you.
$2.57.
That's apart from the one. That's apart from the check from Soros. That's a
That's-
completely
that's
Okay.
separate
Very good.
check.
Dr. Todd, thank you so much for being on the show. But before I let you go, I got to have you say, hi, this is Dr. Todd Miller from Critical Thinking, and I took a left in the valley.
Okay. Hi, this is Todd Miller, and I took a left at the valley. Thank you so much for watching this show.
Excellent.
That was good.